Honorable Mr. Justice Pramod Kohli, former Chief Justice of Sikkim High Court, who has also been the judge at J&K Bar, J&K, Punjab and Haryana High Court, as well as in Jharkhand. He has a vast experience. He has been the president of the J&K Bar Association, as well as the Advocate General Punjab, Advocate General J&K. Mr. Ravinder Kumar Raizada is a senior advocate who has done pro bono work under Article 370. His mastery over the constitutional law, especially under Article 370, is a well acknowledged fact. If one just Googles on 370, two names would forthcome very immediately. That is of Justice Pramod Kohli and Ravinder Kumar Raizada. We are blessed, that is, the entire platform is blessed to have one of the two most acknowledged persons who know the facets of Article 370 of the Constitution of India. So, UILS is an institution of 5 years in Punjab University. Professor Ratan Singh, I would just ask Professor Ratan Singh to welcome both of you. Over to Professor Ratan Singh.
Thank you, Vikas ji. On behalf of Beyond Law and ULS, I welcome to both the scholars, both the speakers, Honorable Mr. Justice Pramod Kohli and Mr. Ravinder Kumar Raizada. What I've heard from Mr. Chatrat, that these two scholars are the scholars par excellence as far as the subject is concerned. Being a student of law and specifically about the Constitution, what I feel is when you talk about Article 370, it's not a question of politics or question of culture or question about the Constitution. So there are a bundle of questions regarding 370, and I'm very sure the scholars before us will definitely resolve our issues, and to the best of level we will satisfy our issues and our queries also. I welcome to everyone, and especially the two scholars, the speakers over the Constitution, over the subject, and I'm very sure that at the end of the day we will be enlightened much, and whatever our issues, problems, or our queries and doubts we will have, we'll definitely get the solves. Thank you very much, and welcome back again on the same platform, please.
So, over to Honorable Mr. Justice Pramod Kohli. So, just over to you, then Mr. Ravinder Kumar Raizada will give his inputs. Thank you, sir.
A very good evening to all of you and all the members of the legal fraternity who are participating in this evening on this talk, Article 370, looking beyond politics. Friends, first of all, I must convey my thanks to Mr. Vikas Chatra, Mr. Deep, and who organized this program. Article 370 has been subject of debate right from the time of its drafting, starting from the Constituent Assembly and even after the Constitution of India came to be framed and enforced. This article has been considered by various groups, political parties, and even the students of law from different angles. That is, I being a resident of Jammu and Kashmir and directly concerned with the impact of Article 370, therefore, I feel that I should deal with this subject. We would like to deal with this subject from three angles: the historical perspective, legal and constitutional, angle and socio-political aspect. First of all, I would like to take up the historical perspective. So for the historical aspect is concerned, perspective is concerned, even so for the historical perspective is concerned, it has two limbs. One is the framing of article by the Constituent Assembly of the
CLC and the Education Institute, that UISL. Yes, on CLC platform to be here on 370 only. So initially I was thinking that I'll be following what Mr. Kohli will be deliberating on the subject. So now I have to start from Article 370 itself. Before 370 was incorporated, we always feel that if we want to decipher 370, if we want to analyze 370, let us go to the Constituent Assembly debates, etc., so that to understand better about 370. If in public discourse, the few legal and political analysts have treated this constitutional provision as an incorporation of a theory that is shared sovereignty between Jammu and Kashmir and India. That was the shared sovereignty concept was promoted. The debates in the Constituent Assemblies are quoted to buttress this plea that the Article 370 is an example of shared sovereignty, where there is an element of shared sovereignty is shared with Jammu Kashmir State Constitution by Indian Constitution. So the issue have arisen, and I think that if this concept prevails, then the whole constitutional debate appears to be political. Understanding between two factions, I will not quote because it's beyond politics, but I'll come to the Article 370. So during this time, I will be dealing only with an aspect that what are the constituted authorities under Article 370 and how the constitutional makers, how the Constituent Assembly has created a structure under 370 so as to finally analyze and leave to everyone that it is not a shared sovereignty. Sovereignty lies in the Indian Constitution, and all those authorities which are there under 370, which are existing under 370, which have been built in under 370, those are the constituted authorities. Mr. Kohli is visible here, so therefore...
Justice Kohli can try as to whether
yes,
it's audible at this area. So this is better. Now? This is audible and more visible also.
Okay, okay. So friends, I was trying to take you to the historical perspective of the Article 370. According to my little understanding, it has two limbs. One, the drafting of Article 370, its object, purpose, and then legal aspect and various other aspects. The other is the historical background which persuaded or which became the basis for drafting Article 370 and inserting it into the Constitution of India. First of all, I'll deal with the situation existing in India before the Constituent Assembly came to be constituted. You know, when Britishers accepted the claim of the India for grant of independence, the cabinet mission was created by the then Prime Minister of British, Mr. Clement Attlee. The cabinet mission was deputed to India somewhere in March 1946. One, to hand over the power or for transfer of the power from British government to India, and second, to work out the manner in which the such transfer of power shall take. The cabinet mission mooted two things. One, that there should be a federal government. At the same time, there would be governments in the states. The second was that the federal government should have only power for four subjects, that is foreign, defense, currency and communication. The other aspect which was mooted by the cabinet mission was they introduced the concept of execution of instrument of accession by the states. The cabinet mission constituted the Constituent Assembly. It was to be created by election from the provincial assemblies by single transferable vote system of proportional representation. Total 389 members contested and were elected. This 389 members Constituent Assembly comprised of representatives of states 292, princely states 93, and chief commissioners of Delhi, Ajmer, Kurg and British Balochistan 4. The election to the Constituent Assembly was completed somewhere in August 1946. The Congress contested, as also the Muslim League under Mr. Jinnah. Congress won 208 seats, whereas the Muslim League won 73 seats, mostly from Muslim areas. The Constituent Assembly was constituted on 6th of December 1946. It had its first sitting on 9th of December 1946. The Muslim League did not participate and insisted for the division of the Indian continent and asked for a separate state of Pakistan on religious basis. The Jinnah refused to cooperate with the Congress and demanded a separate Constituent Assembly for the Pakistan. The cabinet mission could not persuade Jinnah, and there were some persons in the Congress also, I won't name, they were also not interested, and ultimately a separate Constituent Assembly was constituted for Pakistan on 3rd of June 1947. The Constituent Assembly so created could not function properly because of the creation of a separate Constituent Assembly for the Pakistan. The British government scrapped the cabinet mission, which culminated into passing of the Indian Independence Act 1947. When this act came into being, it had two important features. One was that two dominions were to be created, one for dominion of India, that is Bharat, and second for the dominion of Pakistan. Both the dominion were to be created on the appointed date, which was mentioned in the Act itself, that is 15th of August 1947. Though the Pakistan celebrates its Independence Day on 14th August, but according to the Act, both the dominions were to be created on 15th of August 1947. The Act also prescribed the territories for two dominions. Dominion A, that is the India, and Dominion B, that is the Pakistan. Even though the territories were prescribed and defined in the Act also permitted the states to accede to any of the two dominions by instrument of accession. After the creation of the separate constituent assembly for the Pakistan, the remaining members of the Constituent Assembly created for the India remained 299. These 299 members ultimately drafted the Constitution of the India. The Constituent Assembly had 114 days sittings, and over a period of 2 years, 11 months and 17 days. This Constituent Assembly also acted as the first parliament for the India. An interim government was formed under the Prime Ministership of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru on 2nd of September 1936. The Constituent Assembly took up the matter for drafting of the Article 370. Originally, it was numbered as Article 306A. This draft this article was ultimated and adopted on 17th October 1949. When this Gopalaswamy Iyengar debated this article and placed before the Constituent Assembly various facts, the reasons given by Mr. Iyengar for this arrangement, which were termed as interim arrangement, were two, which are notable. The one was that a warlike situation was going on in the territory of the Jammu and Kashmir. Though ceasefire had been ordered by the United UN Security Council, but a part of the territory was still under the occupation of the invaders at the behest of the Pakistan. The government of India, in the meantime, had approached UN Security Council, lodging a complaint against the Pakistan for invading the territory of Jammu and Kashmir. I'll separately deal with that part of the. Right now, I am only dealing with the aspect of the drafting of the Article 370. Another reason given was that the government of India had committed with the people of the J&K state that as and when the conditions become normal and the territory under the occupation of the invaders is free, the government of India wanted to ascertain the wish of the people by plebiscite. It also mentioned another reason was that a representative body who could finalize the accession was not available in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Praja Sabha, which was constituted by the Maharaja under was dead, and it was not possible to convene a constituent assembly because of the circumstances which were narrated by the Mr. Gopalaswamy Iyengar. The Constituent Assembly, on the basis of these circumstances and facts, debated and adopted Article 306A, which later came to be numbered as Article 370. This article was created as an interim measure, and the Constitution also says so, that it's a temporary. So for the India is concerned, what happened in the state of J&K and what were the circumstances which led to the formulation of this article are also interesting. Though the state was being ruled by King Maharaja Hari Singh, it was governed by a Constitution Act 1934, which was later replaced by Constitution Act 1939. Maharaja did not accede to any of the dominions, even after the Indian Independence Act came into force. But he entered into a standstill agreement with Pakistan after the appointed date, that is 15th of August 1947. He proposed a similar standstill agreement to India, which was perhaps not acceded to. In the meantime, this development took place that around 22nd of October 1947, Pashtun tribals invaded Kashmir at the behest of the Pakistan. Maharaja was unable to withstand the attack, having limited army. So Maharaja approached the government of India. There is various correspondence and meetings between Sardar Patel, between Mr. Iyengar, the then Mir Chand Mahajan, who was appointed as the Prime Minister by the Maharaja for some time. That is, it requires a lot of time to deal with those talks and correspondence, which are enumerated by the Maharaja himself in a letter to the President of India. But fact remains that Maharaja was unable to withstand the attack by the Pashtuns. So Maharaja, when approached the government of India, the government of India wanted Maharaja to enter into accession with the dominion of India. It was under these circumstances that the Maharaja signed an instrument of accession on 26th October 1947 with the dominion of India, presently the government of India. The instrument of accession was accepted by the then Governor General of India, Lord Mountbatten, on 27th October 1947. Under the instrument of accession, there were 4 subjects which were meant for the dominion of India, which were to be controlled by the dominion of India. These were the foreign affairs, defense, the communications. Though currency was also initially envisaged by the cabinet mission, but currency is not mentioned in the instrument of accession. The 4th subject which was mentioned in the instrument of accession was the election to the central legislation, that is the parliament, and all things related for the same. The Governor General, one thing is very important, that there is always a confusion that whether Maharaja executed some special kind of instrument of accession with the Dominion of India, and that is why Article 370 had to be incorporated or inserted, is not a correct fact. The instrument of accession which was executed by Maharaja with the Dominion of India was the same as executed by each state which constituted Dominion of India. As most of you must have read that there were 565 odd states in the and princely states in the country, which were having their separate identities and were ultimately brought under the umbrella of the Dominion of India. When the Lord Mountbatten, while accepting the instrument of accession, incorporated and added two conditions. One, that it is the desire of the Government of India that as and when desire of the Government of India to ascertain the wish of the people of Jammu and Kashmir regarding the accession of the state to the Dominion of India. And the wish of the people will be ascertained when the normalcy is restored, that the law and order situation is restored in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and the soil of the Jammu and Kashmir is free from the invaders. These two conditions, out of these two conditions, law and order situation became normal after some time. But the second condition was never fulfilled. The Pakistan continued to occupy the territory of J&K state, and therefore there was no occasion to have a referendum or a plebiscite to ascertain the wish of that state. The Government of India then sent its forces to help the Maharaja's army, and the invaders were pushed back, but the entire territory could not be vacated. In the meantime, but they were stopped at a point. In the meantime, the Government of India approached the United Nations Security Council and lodged a complaint against the Pakistan. The UN Security Council initially passed resolution number 38, which was followed by resolution number 39, and finally the resolution number 47. Under these resolutions, the Security Council, the first step was to order ceasefire, meaning thereby that wherever both the forces are present, they will remain there. The second was that the Pakistan was to withdraw the invaders from territory in stages. India was also asked to reduce its forces from the territory with the passage of time, and both the countries were required to hold plebiscite when the territory is free from invaders. To ascertain the wish of the people. Since none of the conditions imposed by the Governor General or the resolutions of the Security Council ever came into reality, the question of plebiscite front, the question of holding a plebiscite never came into existence. There were a lot of correspondence between the central government and the state and the Maharaja. Maharaja was asked to appoint Sheikh Mahmud Abdullah as its Prime Minister to install a popular government in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, to have a democratic process in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Maharaja issued proclamation on 5th of March 1948, appointing Sheikh Abdullah as Prime Minister. And also, the proclamation also contained a stipulation for convening of the National Assembly for the framing of the Constitution of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Here I may tell you that other states were also given opportunity to frame their own constitution, but most of the states approached the Constituent Assembly and the center that they would like their issues to be incorporated in the Constitution of India to be framed by the Constituent Assembly of India. And the request of most of the state was accepted, and that is why Part 6 in the Indian Constitution contains the provisions for the legislature, executive, and judiciary and other allied matters for all the states governed by the Constitution of India. In the meantime, the situation in J&K started worsening on account of the tussle between Sheikh Mahmud Abdullah and the Maharaja Hari Singh. To assuage this situation, the center forced the Maharaja to leave the state for some time. Maharaja, before leaving the state, issued proclamation handing over or entrusting all his powers, both executive, judicial, legislative, to his son Maharaja Yuvraj Karan Singh by a proclamation issued on 20th of June 1949. Yuvraj Karan Singh then who was earlier appointed as a regent, became the head of the state in absence of Maharaja, who left for Bombay, leaving the state. Sheikh Abdullah, after his appointment as the Prime Minister of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, recommended the convening of the Constituent Assembly for the state of Jammu and Kashmir on 27th October 1950. The central government persuaded to the Yuvraj Karan Singh, who was the head of the state, to accept the recommendations, and Yuvraj Karan Singh issued proclamation for convening of the Constituent Assembly on the basis of the adult franchise by the people of state to frame a constitution for the state by its proclamation dated 1st of May 1951. It was proposed to have a constituency of 40,000 voters at that relevant time. 40,000 population, I think. The Constituent Assembly was elected by the election to the Constituent Assembly were held somewhere in September and October 1951. As many as 75 member Constituent Assembly was constituted. It is relevant to note that all the 75 members of National Conference came to be elected. Though there are allegations that the election was rigged, but the fact remains that all the 75 members of elected to the Constituent Assembly belong to the National Conference, which was earlier Muslim Conference and was converted into a National Conference political party. On the basis of the said, on the basis of these elections, the Constituent Assembly started working in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Sheikh Abdullah entered into an accord with the Government of India, which is popularly known as Delhi Agreement or Delhi Accord of 1952. Under the said accord, it was agreed to between the Sheikh Abdullah and the Government of India that the legislative power of the Parliament will remain only for these matters mentioned in the instrument of accession. And for all other matters, the state will have the legislative powers. The domiciles of the state of Jammu and Kashmir who are residing in the state of Jammu and Kashmir shall also become the citizens of India. It is under these circumstances that when the Constitution of India came into being, Section 6 was enacted, which says that the permanent resident will have to be a citizen of India. So unless he is a citizen of India, he can't be permanent resident of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Another agreement was that instead of the head of the state shall be the Sadr-e-Riyasat to be elected by the legislature of the state instead of a nominee governor of the Government of India, that's to be appointed by the President of India. The designation of the head of the government, the designation of the chief minister will not be operating in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and the Sheikh Abdullah will continue to be the prime minister, and whosoever heads the government, he will be prime minister of the state. It was also agreed that Supreme Court will have only appellate jurisdiction, and the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court will not apply to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The accord also mentioned that all the fundamental rights contained in Part 3 will not be applicable to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Though later, in Section 10 of the state constitution, all the fundamental rights available to the citizens of India were made applicable to the citizens of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It was also agreed that the emergency powers under Article 352 would apply to the state of Jammu and Kashmir only for external aggression and not for internal disturbances. After this accord, the Constituent Assembly ratified the instrument of accession on 15th of February 1954. The state constitution, which was drafted by the Constituent Assembly of the state, was adopted on 17th of November 1956, and it was enforced on 26th January 1957 with the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly of the state. Then, you know that in 1953, Sheikh Abdullah was arrested. He formed a plebiscite front along with his colleagues. Then he remained in jail for a number of years. Then in 1975, there was another accord called Indira Sheikh Accord, and Sheikh Abdullah was taken out of the jail and again made the chief minister of the state. The designation of the Sadr-e-Riyasat and of the chief minister remained as such till 1965. It was in 1965 that the state constitution was amended and the prime minister was redesignated as chief minister, and the Sadr-e-Riyasat was used to be elected by the legislature, though he was to be recognized by the President of India. after this amendment, the president got the power to appoint the governor, though for such appointment, the consent of the government of state was required. These are the historical backgrounds so far the state of Jammu and Kashmir and the framing of Article 370 is concerned. I would ask Mr. Raizada to deal with the structure of Article 370, then we will proceed further for other aspects.
We will go for the Q&A. So thank you. The entire history of around 70 years, it couldn't have been brought in a much lucid manner in a 45 minutes. Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Ravindra Raizada.
So, as Mr. Kohli narrated, the political scenario in 1947, war hostilities, UN Security Council tangle, all these three factors cumulatively affecting the whole discourse or constitutional discourse in respect of Jammu and Kashmir. Why I am saying so, this thing is when Article 306A, that is 370 in the Indian Constitution, it was being debated in the Constituent Assembly. So if you carefully look into the debates, nowhere the structure was discussed. Nowhere. Due to paucity of time or because of several factors that Indian government had committed, what in Security Council, etc. So therefore, everything was in a fluid situation. But once the Article 370 was incorporated, so everything what happened thereafter has to be looked into by reference to the Article 370, how it has been structured, what are the imports of the whole structure, and how this one article contains everything of Indian Constitution. When I make this submission and when I say this, so I'm totally committed to what is such a beautifully crafted at the relevant time. Unfortunately, this article was not discussed in Keshavan and Bharti case. Otherwise, this article itself would have buttressed the theory of basic structure doctrine in the Constitution of India. So I said the shared sovereignty concept in a democratic system. I can understand cooperative federalism, symbiotic relationship between a state and the center in the constitutional scheme of things in Constitution of India. But once a bogey of shared sovereignty is raised, it's fraught with some serious consequences. So therefore, I'll come back to the structure of Article 370. So if you start with 370, the Constituent Assembly was sovereign in its nature. It could have done everything. It could have done anything. It was not under any limitation. So it created several constitutional authorities within the Constitution, governor, president, parliament, state legislature, etc., etc. So we call them constituted authorities. So these constituted authorities are to function according to the power, duties, limitations as provided in the Constitution, we all know. So how 370 has been structured, that's the issue. If you look into Article 370, Class 1, it is in 4 segments. The first segment is that Part 6 will not be applicable in relation to state of Jammu and Kashmir. What is Part 6? Part 6 is a state legislature, governor, state judiciary, etc. So to begin with, it has been excluded in relation to Jammu and Kashmir. But if you look into the part 6, it's so interconnected with other parts of the Indian Constitution. So what is to be enacted in respect of part 6? What would be the other authorities which have been created outside part 6? How they will function within part 6, which has been created, which will be created by the State Constituent Assembly. Why I am saying State Constituent Assembly? When part 6 is not made applicable in relation to Jammu and Kashmir, the situation would arise, what would be the state structure which will operate as a system of governance in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So therefore, you straightway go to class 2 of Article 370. Then you will find that the State Constituent Assembly is to be convened to frame the state constitution. So, read class 1A of Article 70 with class 2. Then you will feel that so far as the Article 370 is concerned, primarily the State Constituent Assembly was invested with the powers to frame the state constitution, which may be paramateria or like part 6 in the Indian Constitution. Nothing more than that. Nothing more than that. So then what exactly happened? Now you go to class B of part of class 1 of 370. Then you will find the legislative relationship between the union and the legislature and the state legislature, which you already have in the Indian Constitution. I will not deal with that. 370 class 1C says Article 1 and 370 will be applicable. No issues. But once you go into Article 370 class 1D, then it is that the president of the country, as he wishes, as he feels, he may apply rest of the provision in relation to Jammu and Kashmir with modification and exception. Here lies the catch. The issue is that instrument of accession comes into play when you go to class 1 subclass D. You look into everything. Then everywhere class 3, when you go, then president will notify freezing of the article 370 itself, modification in the article itself, exception in the article itself, and class 1 subclass D says president will apply with modification exception the rest of the Constitution of India in respect of Jammu and Kashmir. Friends, what is the nature of these powers? These are because the president is there. So if the president is invested with these powers, then powers are executive in nature. Can Constitution of India with modification and exception can be given, an application with modification exception be given to a executive head and with executive power with no accountability? No. Here I will refer you one case, that is A.K. Roy versus Union of India. That is 1982 Supreme Court. What it says, they question the 44th Amendment of the Constitution. The Parliament has left it to the executive to apply 44th Amendment, to enforce the 44th Amendment. The Government of India did not decide or decided not to apply, not to enforce that 44th Amendment. The A.K. Roy, this question came up, that power to apply the constitutional amendment. Here I'll take a pause. That what are the constant powers? If you look into the nature of what is the constant power does mean, because the constant power without any limitation or whatever, when the Constituent Assembly was constituted, it had the constant power to make the original constitution. So therefore, once you make an amendment, deletion, repeal or whatever you do, these are the constant power. So therefore, power to make a modification, power to repeal the constitution would or apply the same would be a constant power. So A.K. Roy says, power simpliciter, applying a constant constitutional amendment would not be a constant power until and unless it is supported by power to amend or repeal the constitution, any constitutional provision. So A.K. Roy says if the power to apply the constitutional amendment or by repeal or a modification would be a constant power, then you go to Article 370, Clause 1, Subclause D. It says power to apply with modification and repeal or restriction any constitutional provision in respect of Jammu and Kashmir. You will positively say that these are the constant powers. Once the President has power to freeze Article 370, make modification under subclass 3 of Article 370. So the nature of this power is constant power. So once you say the President here having the constant power, then you always go to a situation that in this country, the Parliament has the constant power under Article 370, 368. That's why I am saying one more thing, that I am not saying that the constant power of the President under Article 370 are coextensive with the powers of Parliament under 368. I'm not saying these are powers inferior in character, but it doesn't mean that it ceases to be constant powers. Why I'm saying so? What is the impact of this and what is the background of the Jammu Kashmir state constitution? All these provisions, if you look into the state constitution of Jammu and Kashmir of 1956, absolutely you will find so many provisions therein which are not exclusively belonging to the para materia provisions of Part 6. These are the provisions, so much provisions. You will find a para materia provision. You see section 139, 140. It is not in Part 6. It is an adult suffrage, but what you say, adult suffrage, but when you are saying adult suffrage principle, that is 325, Article 325, 35, 25, 326. So these are the provisions. Right to vote is not in the Part 6. How state assembly will be created or it will run, the voter, how people will vote for it, it is not in Part 6. But we find it in Jammu Kashmir state constitution. Where from we got it? So you just look into that. And where part third which have been taken away, where the spirit of which had been taken away by Jammu and Kashmir state constitution. How Jammu and state constituent assembly got these powers? The issue arises, how they derive these powers? Then you go, please go again to Article 370, Clause 1D. It says rest of the provision. Then what happened? Before Jammu Kashmir state constitution was enforced, that is 56. So before that, Constitutional Order 1954 came into force. So Constitutional Order 1954 came into force. What it did? They vacated the territory. How? The President territory, President will apply a provision, President will modify a provision or will apply a provision thereafter. So under that restriction provision, President effaced. President, what it did, that it said that Article 325, 326 will not be applicable in relation to Jammu and Kashmir. Whereas the duty was to make an application. But what they did, totally effaced it. So the territory was vacated. Who will vote? Who will not vote? And with this effect, the Jammu Kashmir state constitution could provide, or by resort to these derivative powers, right to vote, who will vote, and part 3rd as well as section 6, you see into it. Section 5, section 6, section 7, 7, 8, 9, all these provisions are referable to Article 12 to 35, meaning the part 3rd. So this is what I said, when Indian Constitution was in force, or it was brought into picture, then and part 6 was interconnected with so many articles outside part 6. So this structure of the Constitution Order 54 came into force, and the 54 order itself vacated all those territories. President did one thing, vacated the territory, effaced that provision. This provision will not apply in relation to Jammu and Kashmir. This provision will not apply to, and when the territory was vacated, this was occupied by State Constituent Assembly, which was operating from 1951 to 56. So 54, all these provisions were enacted, drafted, and formulated by State Constituent Assembly after 54 only. Otherwise, they had no power to enact or draft these provisions. Why I am saying so? So, who vacated this territory? President vacated this territory. So, if the President vacated this territory, Keshavanand Bharti case says, here 2 minutes on Keshavanand Bharti. How this basis structure theory came into picture? Please, I'll refresh the memories of all advocates who have gone through Keshavanand Bharti. There is a paragraph, that is 654 paragraph of Keshavanand Bharti case in SCC 1973 volume 4. It says, the question was debated that Constitution of India, here we will say that President of India under 370 decide that no provision of the Constitution of India will be applicable in relation to Jammu and Kashmir. In that situation, I am saying, the Parliament decides a day that from today onward, there would be no Constitution of India. There would be no Constitution, only Prime Minister of the country will decide how to proceed as per his own choice. So this question was answered by Supreme Court in a following way, that in Indian Constitution, Article 60 is a constitutional provision wherein the President of India is under oath to defend, protect Indian Constitution. So, he says that if the Parliament decides, Parliament does mean Lok Sabha, Raj Sabha and President. So, if the Parliament decides to abrogate the Indian Constitution in totality, then how the President, who is under constitutional oath under Article 60 to protect and preserve the Constitution of India, he can sign on those lines to abolish his own office and whole Constitution of India to protect or defend. He has taken a constitutional oath. So therefore it said, here there is something which President of India is positively to protect, necessarily to protect, which he will be violating his oath if he goes for the violation of basic structure doctrine. There is something in the Constitution which cannot be effaced, which cannot be defeated, which cannot be repealed. So how the same President of India, who is not a part of the Parliament, under Article 370, with the acting on the aid and advice of the President of India, the same President under oath will apply the Constitution of India with modification, will exercise his constituent power to modify and repeal the Constitution, any provision to apply the same in Jammu and Kashmir. He would be violating his oath. So therefore, the discourse, national discourse came into picture after Keshavanand Bharti in the last 5 or 6 years. This surfaced so vigorously, then you will feel that everybody was saying that how the Constitution Order 1954 would be violative of basic structure doctrine, which is President is to follow while applying Jammu and Kashmir while applying any provision of the Constitution of India in relation to Jammu and Kashmir. I said so. Now it's time up. I understand that Vikas must be looking into his watch also. So therefore, what I'm saying, topic is varied, but I'll close this topic with this, that when if you look into that Constitutional Order 1954 in so many respects violated flagrantly the basic structure doctrine. Whatever the political compulsions of the government were, I don't know, whatever the political agreement or understanding by way of Delhi Agreement had arrived at, it was post 370 situation. So therefore, they could not have gone for an understanding violating the basic structure. So, Constitution Order 1954, blatantly violative of basic structure doctrine. If the central government in August 2019 had taken a course correction to restore or redeem the basic structures of the Constitution by applying the Constitution, where is the issue of challenge to all these type of things? And this is what I leave it to all the gamut of participants. If I am wrong, please analyze the situation and let it be a public debate, let it be a political, no, without any politics, that how we can compromise on basic issues of basic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And before the formal vote of thanks, I would like to thank Justice Kohli, who introduced.
Because I would just for 2 minutes, I would like to mention about the socio-political impact. Just in brief.
Yes, sir.
What is the problem of Article 370 so far J&K state is concerned? The woman in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, if marries to a person outside the state of Jammu and Kashmir to a non-permanent resident, he loses the right to property. She can't have employment in the state. Her heirs can't have education in the higher institutions. They will not inherit, they will not acquire the property in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So this is the one aspect which is impact of Article 370. Though there is a full bench judgment, and fortunately, I had the occasion to appear as a lawyer in that case on behalf of the petitioner, and there were 2 honorable judges from Punjab and Haryana who constituted the full bench and delivered the judgment. Then the second is the IAS and IPS officer. You know, all of you know that under the Indian Services Act, the in IAS and IPS officers and other all India services are allocated to a state. And mostly they serve in a state for 30 years, 40 years, 25 years, and they settle in the state. But in case of Jammu and Kashmir, no IAS, IPS officer would like to settle because they can't acquire property. They can't have education of their children in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Their wife, their spouses or the children cannot have employment in the state of Jammu and Kashmir because of Article 35A, which is directly in contravention to Article 13 of the Part 3. Then, one thing I may tell you, there is no major industry because of Article 370. No health institution has come to the state of Jammu and Kashmir because of Article 370. All the reservations, except scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, no other reservation is applicable to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Then a very revealing thing I will tell you, that 21 Paramveer Chakras have been awarded in the country so far. Out 20 to the army personnel and 1 to the air force personnel. 13 out of 21 Paramveer Chakras personnel, 13 sacrificed their life in the state of Jammu and Kashmir to defend the territory. These persons can die for the state of Jammu and Kashmir, defending them, the people of this state and the territory, but they can't live in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. This is the impact of Article 370. Valmikis were brought by Sheikh Abdullah. to serve in municipalities. Their children remain uneducated. They cannot get any employment other than the sweeper's job. This is the impact of Gorkhas, who served the state for the last more than 200 years. They cannot get employment. Their children cannot get employment. They can't acquire the property. West Pakistan refugees who entered the state in 1947 and at the request of the Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, they settled in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. They are without, they have no right to vote for assembly, panchayat and other civic body elections. Of course, they are entitled to vote for the parliamentary election. Their children cannot get education in the higher institutions. They cannot get employment. So these are the adverse impacts of Article 370, which have been removed now by the notification of 5th and 6th of August 2019. So there are many subjects. Article 35A you must have seen, which is also subject matter of debate now in Supreme Court. It says that nobody can challenge the privileges granted to the state subjects, permanent residents of the state, for employment, for education, for scholarships, and so many things. These are, whereas Article 13 says that any law existing or to be enacted hereafter shall be void if it is shall be void if it contravenes any of the provisions of the Charter. So Article 35A, Article 70, and the various orders issued, that is particularly order Presidential Order 1954, are in direct violation of Article 13 and so many provisions of the. Therefore, my point is that this article had only adverse impact. The Pakistan provoked the Valley people on the basis of this article. It prevented total integration of the people of Jammu and Kashmir with the Union of India. These are the adverse impacts. Therefore, the impact of Article 370 has to be seen not only from the political angle, but also from socio-political dimension, and it's historical. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And just like one day we saw that you were on the platform, we are pleased to inform that Honorable Mr. Justice K. Kannan, who was judge in the Punjab and Haryana High Court, he has also joined the platform. And he is a reservoir of knowledge on all aspects. I welcome Honorable Mr. Justice.
Welcome, brother, on this platform, and my good wishes to you.
Justice Kannan. Sir, welcome on the board. Justice Kannan.
Yeah, it's my privilege to join.
Hello, brother. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Such a privilege to be associated with the talk. And the last piece of what you were saying of the socio-political issues, yes, of what drives these provisions, I thought it was a very nuanced approach to things, and it was truly giving me a new perspective of what I did not think about previously. I just do not have comments. There are a lot of questions which you have, and I'm sure all those questions you need to answer probably to be addressing. It's my pleasure, sir.
Sure.
So, Manish Sai, what was the need of imposing Article 370 if we could occupy the entire Jammu and Kashmir by force?
You see, the question is, force, there were so many historical mistakes which were committed at that time. The first was that there was no necessity of Article 370, but for the Accord of Delhi Accord of 1952 between Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Can you imagine then when the article was being framed, Dr. Ambedkar refused to frame this article on these lines. That is why Gopalaswamy Iyengar was chosen to frame this article. This is one historical mistake. The force could have been used, But unfortunately, the government of India approached UN Security Council and got the resolution. It was a complaint, but unfortunately, the resolution passed by the UN Security Council worked against India.
So on the similar lines, Deepak Verma asked, do you think going to the UN by the Indian government at relevant point in and around 1949 was the wrong step? If yes, whether revocation of Article 370 according to you is justified? And if no, what is your suggestion for taking back of POK now?
You see, it's not a total revocation, but rather the government of India right now did the best thing to utilize this article for breaching its impact. Article 370 does not stand abrogated right now. If you read the CO number 272 and 273, the impact of what I say, the vibrant impact of Article 370, which was adverse to the people of Jammu and Kashmir and whole of the country, has been taken away. Now the entire constitution of India has been applied to state of Jammu and Kashmir through the medium of Article 370 itself. And this is the right thing to do. A historical blunder committed at that time has been rectified.
Sai Amar Vivek asks, my question is the very beginning of part 21. Starts with the heading temporary, transitional and special provisions.
Yes.
Same is repeated in the beginning of Article 369 and 375.
Yes.
If this was so, what was the duration of the temporary phase as per the constitutional scheme? This was not to be permanent, obviously.
You see, Article 369 at that time, because when Constitution of India was framed in 1950, most of the states had given their option to adopt Indian Constitution and with having provisions for the states under Part 6, as Mr. Raizada has told you. But Article 369 tells the state legislatures are able to enact provisions under the state list. The Parliament was given authority for temporary. It was again a temporary measure under Article 369 to frame laws for under the state list, that is list 2 under Schedule 7, for a period of 5 years. Those laws to remain in force for a period of 5 years and not thereafter. So Article 69 is a temporary measure, is again a temporary measure under the same part. But so far 370 is concerned, it was a permanent feature. There was no limitation. Article 369 itself says that it is the laws to be enacted by Parliament for the period of 5 years and not beyond that. But Article 370 was made by almost a permanent feature. Though the debate assembly, Constituent Assembly debates say that it's a temporary measure, it's an interim arrangement. That's the distinction between the two.
So Shubham Gupta, Article 370 stands abrogated. Does the issue of plebiscite still subsist or no?
You see, according to my understanding, the issue of plebiscite does not exist for a variety of reasons. One, the acceptance of instrument of exception, which imposes a condition that wish of the people is to be ascertained. There were two conditions to reach that stage. One was to restore law and order, which has been done. Second was the territory to be vacated by the invaders. And these two conditions were also in the resolutions of the UN Security Council 3847, that the Pakistan would withdraw from the territory and the territory will remain under the occupation of India, though the forces will be reduced to enable the population of the state, including the territory occupied by the invaders, to vote for or against the instrument of accession. Then, after the independence, many elections have been held. The people have voted for the parliamentary elections. So these resolutions and this condition has been rendered odious, redundant. And where is the question of plebiscite now? It is impractical. Pakistan continues to hold our territory. So that is why the UN Security Council also never enforce its resolutions, because they know it can't be.
Sumiti Jain, whether Pakistan has jurisdiction to move to the International Court of Justice, what remedies we have to capture POK by using diplomatic course?
You see, Pakistan cannot go to the Security Council, and Pakistan has not gone for the simple reason that the conditions under the earlier resolutions are that they have to vacate the territory, they have to withdraw the invaders, which Pakistan does not want. That is why Pakistan has not invoked the jurisdiction of the International Court. Otherwise, it would have gone.
Tanishq Argin, why one state was given so much power, why Kashmir was not treated like anything? That is a comment, it's not a related.
I don't know what is the question.
So it's not a question, it is more like a comment.
Yes.
Sumiti Jain, what are the basic factors which can help Indian government to win confidence? Then again, comment. How does the abrogation of Article 370 justify the revocation of statehood to J&K, because now it is split into the UTs?
You see, this is a temporary phase. I feel, that's my belief, that perhaps the government of India wanted to bring the situation under control in the state of Jammu, in Delhi, particularly state of Jammu and Kashmir, and that is why it took over the control of the entire state to itself by making and declaring it a union territory. Otherwise, if it is a state, it has to be an elected government. Though in UT also it will have to be an elected government, but the powers of a elected government under a UT and the powers of the elected government in a state are absolutely different. You will be surprised to know that state list is not applicable. Under 1954 order, when many provisions of this Constitution of India were not made applicable, or made in a modified form, the Schedule 7 concurrent list and state list were omitted. Therefore, the state legislature will have powers beyond the state list. Beyond the state list. One thing revealing, I may tell you, that in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, earlier the election to the parliament were not by a direct election by the people. Article 81, the elections were by the MLA. MLA used to elect a member of the parliament, and not the people, because of 1954 order. This came to be challenged in Supreme Court, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court dismissed the petition, holding that this is also election. This article remained, touch me not, for a number of years. But because of the Kashmir problem, which is prevailing for the last few years, the people of India has realized that the problem of the Kashmir is emanating from Article 370. That is why a vast majority of the elected representatives voted in favor of the resolutions of 5th and 6th of August. Otherwise, earlier, whenever you talk about Article 370, there were so many forces which were against it.
So, thank you. We have stopped the question and answer session. As you have already come on this platform, though Mr. Raizada is for the first time, just since we would be running short of time, we will this time ask first Mr. Raizada. Sir, what is your take? Like, you have the vast knowledge. What is the advice to the lawyers, the other professionals and students? How they should learn the nuances of law? Like, you knew so much subject. How do you read so much? How do you retain so much? How then you have brought the 70 years history in just a crisp of 30 minutes? That art, because in the courts you just require 2 minutes. That art, that trick of the trade, kindly be revealed today.
Actually, when you are briefless or you don't have so many briefs with you to attend, I'm asking you only one thing. And if you ask one question to yourself, the answer is there. What can you do at that moment of time when you don't have the work, you don't have the brief? So you can only at that time read. That you can only do. You can't do anything except reading, studying. Because I tell you, when you move into the bar, so in the lower courts and in the high court, thousands of lawyers come to the high court. And it is only a reference basis. You get the brief. You never, because there is no divine wisdom with the client to come over there that Mr. Raizada must be good enough and we should go. So this is all how to spread your constancy, how to spread your constancy. So once you are enriched with reading which you had when you were briefless lawyer, that is the only value addition which comes into handy when you discuss things like public, discuss amongst yourself, when you discuss in the bar members, when you discuss with the litigants coming over to your senior, when you discuss, this is what is the only way out. Absolutely, I have not seen the other way out in my journey of 35 years from lower court to Supreme Court. Nothing more, nothing less.
So what a fascinating fact. You have 35 years of practice, and Article 35A is a major part in the Constitution of India, which correlates with Article 370. So that you have told that for the initial years when you are briefless, you have to study. But the amount of knowledge which you have gathered speaks volume that you are continuously sharpening your skills. I just read in some of the book that the axe may be sharp, but it has to be sharpened time and again.
I'm saying, had it not been with me, I would not have been here.
What, sir? What?
Had it not been, had the goddess Saraswati would not have been with me, or would not have gifted me this way, I would not have been here at the public platform, in this platform.
The goddess Saraswati, one cannot forget the role, because the veena, the rosemary weeds.
Had I not been gifted with this habit of reading or studying, I would not have been here. I tell you, I had nothing. I am from a very humble background.
So the humble backgrounds, time and again on this platform, we say it's just like a bamboo tree which continues to grow for good 5 years before it shoots up for 30 feet. So according to you, any lawyer who has to succeed, he has to put in a lot of hard work, because they say once the foundation of the building is strong, then the building survives.
I say for 16 years, I worked in labor courts, civil courts only. I had not seen High Court even in my life. For 16 years, can you believe?
So labor and laboriousness, according to you, is the key to success.
What I'm saying, because I had nothing to say, I had nothing to do except study and be in the bar. Be in the bar. Bar is the nursery. Bar is the ground where I developed myself.
So bar is the barometer of any success also. Justice Kohli, your take once again, because large number of new participants have joined. What is your key, according to you, is a success formula?
As I told you earlier also, I'm a first generation lawyer, but God has been very kind. As we discussed last time also, that you need the blessings of the Almighty also for everything. But there is no substitute for hard labor in this profession particularly. It may be so in many other professions, but this is such a profession where there is no substitute for hard labor. The devotion, your conduct, you have to win the confidence of the court, of your client, even of opposite lawyer, and that you can do by your conduct, by your hard labor, by your devotion towards your profession. These are the factors which make you a lawyer.
Right. Sir, can I have Pranav Kohli, because he's been the backbone of this entire platform, if he's in and around, because I tried to unmute him, yes. Somehow his mic was not working properly.
He is.
Yes. Yes, how are you?
Pranav, we would like that since you have been a backbone. Pranav, could you come towards Justice Kohli because that there's no audibility as such. Pranav, could you just switch off that, unmute that mic, mute the mic?
Yes.
We have done it. We have done it. You can be. So Pranav, living under the shadows, once they say if the father has a good legacy, though he's a first generation lawyer. What is your take? How do you carve out your own niche? We all know that Pranav is doing very well in J&K as well as Delhi. How do you feel that once you have a father who is very friendly, who advises you, but he has created a legacy, but still thereafter still you maintain your own niche in that? What is your take? How do you do that?
See, sir, the very obligation of being a second generation lawyer creates a lot of obligations for you to come up to the levels which your parents or which the others expect out of you. So I would only add that being a second generation lawyer, the hard work required is more than a first generation lawyer, because you have to meet certain expectations of the bench, the people, the client, and especially the households. And I've been blessed, like many others. I've been having the guidance and the blessings of my father, my parents, and God has been kind. So far, so good.
So they say in Mr. Kohli's family, there are 3 P's: Pramod, Parul, and Pranav. But they also say,
my mom, rest all her P's. Rest all her.
That's what I am saying. But they also say that 3 P's why they're successful is it is persistence, performance, and perseverance.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the wonderful session. Those who want to connect us for subsequent for the forthcoming sessions, they can just send a ping on 98725-03300, or they can follow our face. Tomorrow we have another good session, an enriching session on Constitution, and that too by Honorable Mr. Justice G.S. Singhvi, who had various judgments, and it's always a treat to hear him, along with Professor Balram Gupta. Before we part, though it looks very odd, but once we find that Justice Kannan is here, a short word of parting from Justice Kannan. Justice Kannan.
Yeah, I'll stay outside the view of camera though, but then all the same, it had been a pleasure to be associated with Justice Pramod during my short tenure there in Chandigarh, and that I could carry the conversations through a video mode now, or that I could hear him was an added benefit. And to take what Justice Pramod's son was saying, I was a 3rd generation lawyer. So he was saying that a 2nd generation, you had to work hard, but a 3rd generation, you had to work harder. So therefore, a person who begins first seems like he doesn't need to work. No, it doesn't. It can't really be like that. You have to work hard. Probably what Mr. Ravindra said is what is correct. That it's just the hard work. Whichever generation you are, that is the hard work which will pay and which will take you into reckoning. I'm sure this is what this lockdown period has taught us, to stay connected with law at all times on a regular basis, thanks to Vikas. So good luck to all of you. It's my pleasure to join in conversation.
Thank you, sir. And tomorrow we have the session, Understanding the Preamble of Constitution. So another leaf, another way. Thank you. Thank you. Stay blessed. Stay at home. Stay healthy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Mr. Ravinder's probably mic is not functioning.
Thank you.
To meet with Mr. Ravinder. Thank you. Thank you.